So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining us from. This is another webinar in the series of application security, and today we're talking about, is my code secure? So before we jump into questions, I would love we have an amazing panel for you. Some of you heard us talk just before we started, but we really have an amazing panel, very experienced guys. And let's start with just a round of introduction. I'll just go, from left to right on my end. So Itzik, why don't you introduce yourself? Then Gil, Robbie, and Naor.
Sure. I'm Itzik Spitzen. My background is I'm a software developer. That's where I come from and done most of my life. I built companies, software development tools, and other companies, legal tools, and so forth. And I joined Wizer about a year and a half ago, and I'm pretty excited about what we're doing. I'm really, really excited about what we're doing.
And Itzik is also writing the CTFs, many of them. So all the guys that are trying to basically hack the CTFs, Itzik maybe can help you out with hints on LinkedIn. So reach out to him. Yeah, Gil.
Hi everybody, I'm Gil, happy to be here. I guess my experience relevant to this is lots of reverse engineering and hacking. So I have GitHub with tons of CVEs, normally Windows kernel, browsers, things like that. I love this, challenge of finding, just bugs in software, and I guess it's going to be fun talking with you guys about it. I can just tell you that I'm a hacker turned into entrepreneur, and today I have a startup called Piano, where we do data security from the code. So this is very relevant. Thank you.
Cool. We're going to also talk about that. That's actually really interesting. I remember I met you at an event, and you were telling me about it, and it's very innovative. So we'll touch that also a little bit later. Robbie.
Hey, I'm Robbie. I am a senior pen tester. I mainly pen test web applications, but also internal networks and Active Directory systems. And my whole life I dedicated to hacking and to understanding applications from an outside perspective and seeing how to break down applications. And then besides that, I also make videos on helping developers to help them secure their applications, because I've seen so many applications where things went wrong. So we can apply those lessons from the hacker perspective and help developers think about security from a whole different perspective to help them secure better or more secure.
Yeah, and for some of you probably seen Robbie in our videos. So yeah, we use a real hacker. It's not an actor. Robbie knows what he's talking about. No, you're next.
Hey everyone, I am Naor. I am a product manager at Aqua Security. I joined Aqua 2.5 years ago as part of Argon Security acquisition. I was the first engineer in Argon Security. I managed the engineering team, and now I'm the product manager who leads the supply chain security in Aqua Security. That's it, excited to be here.
Yeah, so you're from the defense side. You're looking for all of those issues. Cool. So like I said, guys, we have an amazing team here. Let's start first of all with, is there really a problem, right? Like developers are smart people. So all of us, that have dev teams, we have sometimes people with 20 years experience. Like, don't they know what they're doing? Like, if you ask them, will they tell you that there are security issues? Like, should you be worried how big of this problem really is? Anybody wants to start, or Itzik?
I can start. Yeah, I can start. So my perspective is that developers do know a lot about a lot of things, but even if they understand security in very high level, many of them understand. Like, at least you can talk about different vulnerabilities, OS top 10. You can talk about that. They probably know what those are, but the level of depth is typically the problem. Is like, it's fine that you know a lot about SQL injection, but there are other types of injections, and there are so many different ways to think about injection issues and so forth. So if you don't get deep enough, you're missing a lot. The other thing that I think is a problem is that developers are builders by nature. They're builders. They think about how to build stuff, how to release stuff, how to build a nice code that looks good, that performs well, that deliver it quickly, deliver it time to market, things like that. They're pros at that if they're good developers, right? What they don't think about is, are there cracks here? They just don't think about it. It's not part of their standard way of thinking. They build, okay? So they don't think about cracks. So I think that's a problem, and I think we should be spending more time kind of like developing that part of our minds. And I'm talking as a developer, developing that part of our minds on how is our code really vulnerable and where it can be vulnerable, and kind of like put a different hat on from time to time.
Gil, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I want to tell you a story. So I was supervising 700 engineers in my previous role. I was responsible for product security globally for an American company. And we were responsible also for training the developers. And one day, we did a training for 200 developers. And I was on the stage telling everybody, look, never trust the input that you get into your code, because that input can bypass your code and do nasty things, taking control of the application that you do. And afterwards, somebody came to me and he told me, what's the problem with the trust issue? Like, why can't we trust the code? So suppose that I'm the server, I also wrote the client. So I trust my own code. I'm the client side as well. And this is where, for the first time, I realized why sometimes developers don't get it, because they don't understand that the bad actor, the cyber criminal, can act on behalf of your client. They can just reverse engineer it. They can just look into the protocol, and they can come up with their own bad input, bad payloads for your own server to attack it. And then it dawned on him, like you could see the ka-ching, and since then you could see the way he started to have the thought process of when he builds code to be careful and to verify everything that he gets from the outside, never mind if it's his client or not, So that's the way I try to contribute, like to enlighten people to understand security in a better way.
When I saw that the most, when we did the CTFs and we were like, let's do a little bit harder. This is too easy. And then because we target developers mostly, we saw that nobody's solving it, like zero. And we had to sort of reduce the level. So we're at a point where we're always like making it easier and easier, because for hackers, it's easy. But when it comes to developers, even people with 20 years experience, they find it hard because they just are not wired to think like that. So when do you think typically it's a good time to start thinking about it? Naor, you're from a vendor side, right? So you guys probably are meeting, during the sales process, a lot of customers. When do you mostly see customers basically coming to you? Is it early on from the get-go, or is it usually when they're more mature? And when do you think it should, start? When are they ready to actually start thinking about this?
So it basically depends on the organization itself. There's a lot of our customers that are startups, small startups, that they're security oriented. They're looking for security tools from the beginning, and this is most of the startup the security companies. But when you talk about other areas, security is not the top of in the top of their minds. I think that a lot of organizations start thinking about security once they need to work with some type of they want to sell for an organization that needs some SOC 2 compliance or other compliance tools, and they are starting to think about the security tools and how they can achieve those compliance regulations. I think that as early as you can start thinking about security is the best, because then you have security depth. something like technical debt that you have in code. So you have much more security debt and you have much more vulnerabilities, and it's super hard to fix all the vulnerabilities. And if you catch them as soon as possible, basically you'll be able to mitigate the risks much faster, much earlier in the development life cycle.
Yeah. And I think this can also be done relatively cheap at the beginning. So Robbie, you posted a video recently where you talked about shift left and user stories. Do you want to touch this? Because I thought it was really important if you know how people approach security, and it can be done for free, right? You don't have to have fancy tools when you begin. It's not either you spend a lot of money or nothing. So why don't you touch this a little bit about the concept of shift left?
Exactly. So in security, there's different places where you can find security mistakes. If you find a mistake in production, that is quite expensive because you then have to scramble to get it fixed as quickly as possible. If an attacker finds a bug in production, that's even worse. If you find a bug during the QA process, that's good. You can still go to development, but it still costs you time and money. But if you can mitigate bugs in the design process, that is the cheapest place to prevent bugs. And an easy way of doing that is when you're writing your user stories, you're talking about sales wants this feature to do this, business wants this feature to do this. Now let's add security as a stakeholder there. And let's make tasks for security. Let's say security wants that all user input that goes into here is handled in this way. Security wants that this feature that tenant A cannot access data from tenant B. Security wants these files not to be stored there, but to be stored there. And this then also makes it really easy to then add unit tests for all of these requirements that security has. And this way, when a vulnerability eventually still gets found, you can then either say, okay, we did not see this during the design process, so we need to update the design process and make sure that security stakeholder has this requirement for other user stories. Or you can say this was a developer mistake. We maybe need to put more effort into training developers to make sure that these mistakes don't happen again. And it's a really useful tool that is free because you don't need to buy expensive tools. You can just implement it straight away and start running with it.
But who does this? So who? Because feature-wise, I get it. The product guys go in and say, here are the user stories. They take the requirements, they break it down to stories. They don't necessarily think about like, you have to do, you know, after 3 failed logins, I want to block the user or whatever. So again, I'm a small company. And by the way, any one of you can answer this, you know, who is responsible to writing those user stories? How do you incorporate that mindset into the sprint?
I think that,
Yeah.
you know, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, as a startup, like you're talking about small companies, but they have one goal, and that's getting business. And if security is delaying their deliveries to get more business, more customers, then definitely they are not going to do it. So the way I look at security, I divide it into two. Like, as you said, coming from the management, like a product manager or one of the founders, because it is a small company, or coming from the developers. You will find that when you are working with very experienced developers, they already will know what to do against SQL injections or other things that you know, XSS or whatever in the web today. I can give plenty of examples, but the point is, if nobody is there to preach like, hey, let's do more security, let's have more awareness, it's just not going to be there, and that's gonna be hurting, and that's gonna be embarrassing. You know, once people from the outside will be able to take down your website in the good case, and or just, you know, publish the data of your customers in the worst case. So
in addition to that, there are a lot of open source tools, free tools that you can use during code time, during CI times. You can create your gates for each phase of the development phases. So start with the IDE, and then it's the CI/CD process. Whenever you create a pull request and scan your code for new vulnerabilities and stuff, and you can create automatic gates to validate that your code that you want to insert into production are free from new vulnerabilities.
So I think it starts from taking ownership, right? Like someone on the team or in security or the founder, you know, a lot of times it's the founder, somebody needs to say, hey, we care about security, and then that should trickle down, because then they start to look at the user stories, or even force in the user stories at least one security related story. So that becomes a habit in every sprint, just like we involve the QA in the user stories.
And this is also something that is currently trending, is to have somebody be a security champion within a company. Somebody who's not necessarily doing security in their day-to-day job, but you just take a developer and you say, like, you are now, or do you want to be the security champion? Do you always want to vouch for security and keep that in the back of your mind and kind of be the voice of security in the whole development team? And that way, that's the responsibility of someone, and it does not get forgotten, because it's the responsibility of this one person to always be that voice of security talking.
So yeah, Itzik, I thought you wanted
No,
to say something.
I completely agree, by the way, with having someone in charge of, like, you take someone, they don't necessarily need to be security geeks with a lot of experience, but if you put them in charge, you say, okay, now you need to get deep and wide, you need to understand this. They will take the time to learn things. They'll start to get more and more understanding of stuff. They can review code. They can help people think about the stories from the beginning and then how to implement them if developers kind of like have questions. So I'm really a big advocate for, like, taking people, making them champions, and making them kind of like giving them responsibility, even though they don't have that background necessarily.
Okay, so tip number one, I would say, is appoint someone. Like,
Gabi, maybe I can add something, because I want to give a concrete answer. Okay, so appointing someone is definitely the way to go, but sometimes that person might lack the experience that is needed. As Noor said, you can start with using some open source tools. They are free. You don't need to pay for them in your CI/CD. They will help you to raise the quality of your code. And the other thing is just like you do that, also to think sometimes, the reason I love security is because it's so hard to do defense. It's so much easier to hack into a corporate network or whatever, but doing defense in scale when writing code is like impossible. And just to give you a stupid example, it is security, but you will see why it's not a 0-day or not like a vulnerability. Let's suppose that you have a checkout page on your web, and let's suppose that the price of whatever, you're buying a book online, okay, in your new e-commerce website, and the price for the item is coming from the client, coming from the HTML that actually the end user is seeing on the screen. And then somebody can come in and change the price to $0, and then he will submit this information input form back to the server, and the server will take the price as is, because the developer developed it that the price is coming from the HTML/JavaScript, and that's it. Now it's so easy to bypass it. So now we are not talking about a vulnerability like, hey, I have a bug in the code. We are just talking about a broken web application that doesn't validate stuff. So this is why, I'm talking about when to start. You need to be thinking of like, hey, like criminals will find a way to bypass my system to pay less or whatever. Definitely, you need to think about it from day one. Now, talking about vulnerabilities, yeah, just start using code scanners, things like that. All the open source that you use, then they might have bugs. You don't want to inherit these bugs into your own production environment. So you can use either Snyk or Aqua or many other solutions out there. So that's my long answer to, like, be careful with security. It's not only vulnerabilities, it's how you design your system.
My guess is now that, I don't want to open brackets, but I'll just say it. I think now with all the LLM and the AI, my guess is that the parameter now is almost like text-based, right? It's like a whole sentence, good luck with sanitizing that. But that's sort of like, yeah, that's, maybe we can do a whole webinar about that, because I don't want to, yeah. So I forgot about security from the get-go. A customer asked me about it. SOC 2 demanded, PCI demanded it. Where do I start? So how do I know how big of a problem we have? I start with a scanner? Do I go and sign up for a bug bounty? Do I invite a pen tester? Like, how do I just figure out how big of a problem do we have so that I can plan accordingly? Any one of you guys?
Maybe I will take this one as well.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But I just want to say first, like, you need to understand because what is security after all, right? We want to make sure that we have a resilient system. We want to make sure that we can serve our customers. So before we approach it, we need to do prioritization, because securing everything is so hard. And what is everything? Now we need to do mapping of the assets that we want to secure, and which assets should we start with. Is it everything that faces the internet, like public APIs exposed to anybody on the internet, or is it an internal database inside our VPC, right? So which one do we start with, and how many assets like that do we have? And are we collecting sensitive data like driving license or KYC documents, know your customer kind of documents, which are very sensitive? So we need to ask ourselves all of these questions, okay? And once we have the list of assets that we either collect or assets of computing devices and what is exposed to the internet, then we can start tackle them. And then, Gabby, to go back to what you were saying, yeah, you can outsource the help of a pen tester, penetration tester, somebody who has experience in hacking and comes to you and helps you to map everything you have, to do a threat modeling of like, where is the likelihood of the best return on investment? Because you can invest security like infinitely and still you never know if you're secure. Yeah. So the question is how to start and where to stop and so forth. So somebody external will help you to understand that.
I love this answer because it aligns perfectly with just the basic security. Start with risk assessment. Where are your crown jewels? What do you care about? Is it asset or is it processes or all of those things? So if you've done your risk assessment originally, you can basically align the priorities based on that, and it doesn't matter if it's a network or code. So I think this is a perfect way to start. So now that you are aware of the risk and you aligned it, how do I know? Yeah, going back to that original question. So first of all, thank you very much, Gil, for that, because I think that was spot on. Before we even invite anyone in, let's know the risk. So now that we know the risk, how big of a problem do we have? Anybody?
I think that with these three options that you gave,
or another option. Yeah,
other options as well. But if you want to check, okay, do we want to have a tool that checks your code? Do we want to have a pen tester? Do we want to start bug bounty? I think in those there's 3 steps and they should be followed in order. And the first step is to indeed get some code scanning on your code. Code scanning tools are getting better, but are definitely not amazing yet. They won't find everything, but they will be able to help you get a vision of the lower hanging fruits in your security profile. They will allow you to spot patterns of issues. If you see that you have a ton of SQL injection issues coming from these code tools, then you know, okay, this is something we need to work on. If these tools find 5 of a different kind of issue, then you know, okay, we need to look into how we can mitigate this on a whole level. And once you're done with that, and once these code scanning tools are only giving you false positives, then you move on to a pen test. And with a pen test, you're going to get a real hacker hacking your application and hopefully digging deeper than those low-hanging fruits. They're still not going to find everything. If you're a pen tester and you think that you're going to find everything, then you're terribly wrong, because that's not possible. But with a pen test, you're going to get a deeper level. You're going to also have a person working on it, so you can ask that person questions, and that person can also help guide you into where you need to invest more. Now, then we can move on to bug bounty. And bug bounty is really, in my opinion, for very, very mature companies. Bug bounty is where you pretty much open your company up to the world and say, hey, look, try to hack us. If you hack us, don't go to the dark web. We'll pay you for your vulnerabilities, for your work. And this is something that I do not recommend starting with, because in the beginning, if you have a lot of low-hanging fruits, you're going to drown in reports coming in. You're going to have to pay out far beyond your budget. It's best to start with the cheaper scans, then go to the already a bit less cheap but still cheap pen tests, and then move to bug bounty when you are confident, hey, we have a maturity in industry, a good industry maturity of security, we can handle real hackers constantly hacking our infrastructure. And I think that's also a really, if you can get to that maturity, having a bug bounty can also show to your competitors, look, these guys are up there, and then can help in sales as well, in my opinion. So definitely worth getting there.
I think also, I would say have both, because pen testing, right, they're looking for vulnerabilities that are not necessarily exploitable, and bug bounties are gonna probably report only things that are exploitable. So it's probably worth doing both, but like you said, it's more costly, the bug bounty, and probably you want to be more mature. If you didn't do your pen test, then running a bug bounty you'll just pay a lot for like low-hanging fruit. So
yeah,
cool.
May I elaborate a little bit? I totally agree with Robbie and Gil, and I also think that it is really depend on the phase of the company, and I don't think that you really need all the scanning capabilities, protect all of your organizational area by day zero. I think you should do it phase by phase. Start with assess understand your assets. First of all, where is the most critical assets of your organization, what you need to protect first, and then mitigate it by zone. Let's say application security, cloud security, data security, etc., and eliminate it one by one. And I think that you don't really need from day one all the tools available in the market today. There are a lot of tools, and the market is going to a consolidation. So find one tool to protect an entire area, for example, cloud security, and get it from code to cloud, and then go to a data loss protection, and etc. I think that customers need to tackle it one by one, and not from day zero fix all of your organization security.
I think you guys have a free scanner, right? One of the most downloadable code scanners, right? It's an open source one.
Yeah, right. We have Trivi, the best scanning tool in the market. We just got 20K GitHub stars. Wow. Yes, the code scanning, image scanning, cloud scanning, everything basically. Trivi.
So there's really no reason not to at least run a scanner and check if you have any low-hanging fruit, and get sort of a sense and this will also probably help you to understand that you'll probably realize that you need to train your developers, which is another topic, because what I see sometimes, and I would actually love to, I won't say what I think, but I would love to, I've seen more and more companies just try to get away with buying a WAF or anything like that and saying, you know what, yeah, it's an old code, we don't even have the developers that wrote it, so let's just put a WAF, configure it well, and that's it. Like you said, Gil, we're going to validate our user input, we're not going to trust it, so we're just going to use a WAF. Yeah, I'll let any one of you, if you want to.
For 90% of my pen tests, during the kickoff, I ask them, do you guys have a WAF that will block me if I start pen testing your application? All of the times the IT directors say, yes, we have a WAF and it will block you. It's a great WAF, it will do everything. For 90% of those pen tests, I never ever get any request blocked by any WAF. And yeah, that happens all the time. Almost every pen test, that is the case. And so these WAFs, yeah, they can help, but don't believe that they will keep you secure, because that's not true at all.
Right. I think
it will make your payload look cooler. That's what it will do.
Yes.
Right. I think that the WAFs are always good to add as another layer, but there's a constant battle between what the functionality of what you're trying to achieve and the WAF configuration. You can forever invest in configuring the WAF more and more accurately to kind of like capture the malicious behaviors and so forth, but it will never be, eventually it will never catch everything. And so first of all, you need to make sure that your app continues to work, because you can block everything and nothing works. So the configuration of the WAF is the tricky part. You can invest forever and still have cracks and issues and ways to bypass it. And as you said, eventually I'll just get a cooler payload with some, escaping methods and so forth to get to the same point. But, hackers love it. They actually find it very, very interesting to find out what's the best way to get in. So WAFs are typically not a barrier for anyone.
Yeah, so you can't WAF your way out of it. Let's
No.
call it that way.
One thing I wanted to add, if I may, we talked about prioritizing the crown jewels. I think it's really important. Obviously, prioritizing your the things that you care about, you want to protect. Then there's also prioritizing the scan results. The scan can be a lot of noise as well. So you can get a lot of noise. I think Robbie named it false positive. There's some false positives. There's some things that look like that the AI or whatever tool that you're using thinks that it could be a problem, but it's not exploitable or can't be even exploitable. So I'm going back to that appointment. You still have to have someone look at it, sort it, and do something with it. Because if you expect the developers to regularly look at those reports and do something about it, forget about it. They're not going to do it. You have to have someone that is actually appointed and they know that that's their job. They need to look at the scans, they need to understand them, they need to sort them, they need to prioritize them. And they prioritize them based on the priorities of the crown jewels that we just prioritized before. So just wanted to add that because scans sound great and they are great, but there's a way to use them and it has to be filtered and prioritized.
So Itzik, maybe we take the conversation a bit to a different direction, because we are telling the audience like they came here, they're curious, and we are talking about code security. But if we keep on telling them, hey, use code scanners, that's gonna be like the wrong point. I mean, it's still valid, it's still necessary, but I think many people approach me because they know I'm a hacker and I find bugs in real software, okay, and through reverse engineering, which is completely different art from web hacking. But my point is, when they come to me, they approach to me and they ask me, hey, Gil, how do you find bugs? How do you approach it? And this is what I think if we give some tips to developers here, they will get better. So First of all, I will start with saying maybe the obvious things, but if security is a profession by its own, okay, just like you're a developer or an architect or a designer, whatever, security is the same. It's very hard. There are so many niche. And the point is, if you get to read security, like if you get to read walkthrough for capture the flag and write-ups on how to exploit a vulnerability, you will get better. And the idea is that how do you get better? You get ideas of where vulnerabilities can be found inside your code, okay? And this is how you become better. You get the experience of others. You start to look at your code differently. So to give you one example, as developers, when you do code reviews to your peers or to yourself, what you need to think is exactly where can your code be taken out of its expected control. Okay, so if your code is, the expected control is the way it runs, but and this is the beauty and the art and challenge of security is how can somebody give you an input that will change the course of your code to do something that you didn't expect or something that you don't even realize that it's possible. And I will give you a stupid example because this is how you learn. Let's suppose that you're taking a URL to download an image for the customer profile. Okay, so you give a URL as the customer to upload an image, and the server now is taking this URL and it needs to fetch the file from there. Okay, but what happens if somebody gives you an internal address to your own VPC, to your own network and entities there? So suddenly your software is doing something that you didn't expect. It's as simple as that. And believe me, from this very simple operation, sometimes people manage to find their ways inside your network. So the point is to filter the URL. And this is where it becomes harder. Even when you have a list of websites or everything that is not my own internal network, then your regular expression becomes very complicated, and then people like myself find a way to bypass it. Okay, so my point is, again, when you build stuff, think of how somebody can come in and change the behavior of what you expect to be the outcome. And that's like the best tip I can give you when you approach real security at the code level.
Totally you do that.
I would add to that during, if we hire people and when we test them for their skills, if we're going to add also security to the testing, to the hiring process, first of all, people will start adding that to their resume. Like, I actually understand security, because right now you're seeing all the frameworks they know, but I don't see a lot about I've done this amount of CTFs, or I completed this. So I think hiring managers and R&D managers, anybody that is hiring, should prefer people that know security. It goes back to culture, right? Just like we're talking with security awareness about how important is culture, security culture. It the same goes for developers. Itzik, you wanted to say something, and I sort of stopped you.
No. I'm good. What I wanted to maybe a little bit add, but I totally agree with what Gil just said. Is I think the idea of developers thinking only about building. That's something I said before, but I just want to emphasize in light of what Gil said. Is if you learn how to hack, if you have first experience in trying to find those cracks, you'll be much more knowledgeable in protecting them. Like that. I used to say, the best cop used to be a thief. Why? Because they have the mindset. They understand the mindset of a thief. So that's why they're a better cop, because, oh, a cop would think this way, that way. That's how they will get in. They will exploit those vulnerabilities to get in. So if you're not wired to think about vulnerabilities, they won't just come to you, automatically without learning them.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, go ahead.
Gabi, just to add on what you said, okay, and it all connects together. I think as it's a non-brainer today that, as a developer, you need to write, comments next to your code lines, or you need to write documentation, and obviously unit testings. You also need to know security, okay? This is obligatory. It's not like an option anymore. Like we need as a whole industry, as developers, we want to be professional, we want to be good. And today, yeah, we need to understand security. And I'm not even talking about the fact that we need to understand privacy, okay? Because we have the responsibility for writing secure code and systems that support privacy rights. And today it is important with the GDPR, CCPA, and so many other regulations. So just to give developers the idea, if you ask me specifically, yes, it's your responsibility. Are you happy about it? Who is happy about writing documentation, right? But if you hold yourself professional, yeah, you should care about this as well. You should be a well-rounded developer. And the well-rounded developer is something I call an engineer.
Yeah. In my opinion, less, security hopefully means a more tighter code. So it's also a better code. It's more high quality because you're more specific with what you're writing. So not only you're getting a more secure code, you're probably getting better code in general. That's sort of my assumption. But Gil, I want to talk about privacy in a second, but because that's actually a very interesting point, that we usually think about vulnerabilities only and we don't think about privacy when it comes to writing code. And that's a very interesting angle. But before that, do you guys have any suggestion for developers, like what to learn, frameworks to follow, anything like that? Any one of you?
Yeah, I think go ahead now. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I think the most known framework for security guidelines specifically is the OWASP. So this is the first thing to take a look at. For example, they just there's a new OWASP top 10 security for ILM usage. So it is also contains all the best practices. So I think this is the first thing that you need to follow. This is I think this is the best line. This is the best line for becoming secure code.
Exactly.
For web, I would say.
Then has actually been created from real data from applications. So these are not just vulnerabilities that have been invented. No, this is real data from public vulnerabilities, and that show the trends in what kind of vulnerabilities come. So if you're developers, already know the top 10 of the most common vulnerabilities in applications, then that is already a really big segment of what is possible. And of course, there will still be nitpicky things that are missed, but if you already have that core, then you already have that mindset that Itzik also talked about earlier, and that will make you much more aware when writing code.
And you know what's crazy? Like SQL injection is still in the top 10. So it was like found like what, 20 years ago? So this just show, I think this is proof that developers don't think like, hackers, because it's not just the knowledge. People know about SQL injection. Every developer knows about SQL injection, like they should, okay? But still, we're hearing about SQL injection massive hacks happening every year, huge companies. So, and this is like the oldest, type of, I would say, vulnerability or whatever, and it's still in the top 10. So, let's talk about privacy. Gil, I want you to, because this is sort of an area that you focus on, and I think it's really interesting. And the more we see, like you said, GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, all of those, how do we bake that into the app?
Yeah, so just to say what is privacy, okay? Because I'm not going philosophical, but the point is that the GDPR, that's the European regulation for data protection, what they say is that privacy is a human right, okay? So it means that if you are a business collecting data and processing data of your customers, the data first belongs to these customers. And this is a huge mind shift in the way we understand data. So we are not allowed to do whatever we want with the data, okay? So let's suppose there is a website collecting data of navigation, or that's the obvious stuff, but even taking input forms from the developer, from the customers. And this data is something you cannot just take and share it with other vendors. You cannot, for example, take the telephone number, which you, for example, collected for 2FA, and starting to send text messages for marketing purposes. This is purely illegal, okay? So when we are talking about privacy, we need to understand that, hey, like the data is not ours. We might be asked sometime to delete the data of a specific customer. So now it means we need to build our system in a way that we can know where to find the customer's data and to be able to delete all of it, okay? So to give you one example where in coding it matters, let's suppose that you have debug logs in your code, that you have some, log lines throughout your code telling you what happens in production. And sometimes we see the mistakes that even companies as big as Twitter and GitHub, they forget these logs in production. They are enabled in production, and they send even plain text passwords to the logging system. Okay, so today we are aware of that problem, but let's take it to the next step. You have the first name of your customer, the email address, the telephone number, and you send these to logs. And now this is a privacy policy issue, okay? Because you want to make sure that your employees cannot access databases in production, for example. That's one requirement from privacy standpoint, as well as security, obviously. And you want to make sure that the footprint of the data is exactly where you expect it to be. Definitely not in a logging system, for example. So that's a long answer to just give a few concrete examples.
It happened recently to Twitter. I saw them tweeting recently that they made a mistake. I think I saw that.
That happened a few years ago.
Okay.
With credentials specifically, which is very bad, and they needed to reset it because back then there was no 2FA. So now people know why 2FA is very important as well. So you cannot escalate after stealing, the database with all the passwords, even though they are not supposed to be stored in plain text. Speaking of security yet again, but yeah, it all comes back to security.
So a few more questions. KPIs. So how do we know? So we started, we got better, we used, we followed the OWASP 10, we did some training, we did some scanning. Are we getting better? Like, can we measure it? I guess we're getting better, but is it measurable? Yeah, guys, feel free to take it.
Yeah, so maybe I will give an answer because it's a good question. It's very hard to answer. Okay, on the surface, it's like, how do I make it quantitative, right? That's the question. Because the problem is with security, and this is the problem. When we talk about functionality of software, let's suppose we want to do addition, arithmetic addition. We know A plus B is equal C. We know what to expect. It can even work for negative numbers, right? But when we are talking about the whole system, and we gave throughout this discussion here, we gave many examples of potential bugs and vulnerabilities. How can we make sure that the damn code is robust and is bug-free? Okay, the answer, we cannot. Given how code is working, we cannot guarantee that there is no bug. There are no bugs. Okay, so the point is, yet again, how can we make sure that we are better? And I guess the simple answer is, yeah, you go through the obvious things that we mentioned, like code scanners, code reviews, having all of this stuff in place. And then you take a pen tester. So this is where, if you think you have done everything, it's time to get a pen tester, somebody who is a professional hacker. They have the experience to do code auditing, to find holes. If they cannot find stuff, you're probably good. But then maybe people like Robbie or myself or Naori, which are hands-on hackers, will still find our way inside. But then you say, hey, where do I stop? It's infinite. And that's the problem with security. Yeah, it's so hard, and somebody better will always come and find the way inside. And sometimes it's not about code, it's stupid configuration errors. Okay, so that's the yet again long answer.
I think, yeah, it goes back to security is not a 0 or 100. It's really about, are you making progress, right? So you want to sort of show that you have installed the tools, you have the education, you're doing the pen test and the bug bounty, and as long as you're making progress, that's the best you can do, right? Like, you can't, and then of course you have to think about the incident and response. So everything is tied together with, you know, the entire security ecosystem. It's not an isolated thing that you're measuring. You're measuring your entire security, your ability to incident and respond, your ability to detect, your ability to protect, all of those things. So yeah, anyone else has anything to say about this?
Yeah, I think that you need to take a look in the overall trends in your organization, in the organization, to see where did you start and where you are now regarding sensitive data, vulnerabilities, etc., etc., etc. And this is the way you can measure how your existing situation is related to the past, basically. And then I divide it into three main phases. The first one is discover what you currently have regarding your vulnerabilities and your security measurement, overall measurement. After you discovered it, you need to set some protection in order to protect your environment for new vulnerabilities to come into your production environment. And the third part is to have response and detection, and how you manage new findings in your organization. So those are the three phases for managing and how to keep track over your entire organization. Standards, baseline, let's say, and to see the trend that you started here and now you are you're closer to zero, basically.
Gotcha. Okay.
As a peace of mind, it's also the goal of getting to zero it's a goal that nobody has achieved yet. Like even Google still has hundreds of bugs being found in their bug bounty program. So, you know, the goal should not be to get to zero. The goal should be to get as close to zero as you can, and to make sure that the risks are as small as you possibly can. And if you just constantly keep on working towards that, then you're doing a lot. If you really set your goal at zero, then you will just invite 1,000 hackers, and believe me, you will not be at zero anymore. You know, so yeah. And then mimicking these big companies like Google, like Meta, is also great, because they are like at the top of what needs to be secured. So if you mimic what they are doing, then you're probably moving in the right direction.
Great. Two more questions. I actually have more, but I think we have time for two more. How do you introduce secure coding or training without overwhelming the team? What do you do there? How do you sort of because I'm hearing from time to time R&D teams that are pushing back and they're sort of saying our developers know, or they're the most expensive resource in the company. We don't have now time to take them offline and, you know, spend days or whatever. So what sort of is a realistic, do you think at least, what's a realistic answer to that? And how much time should they spend in practicing secure coding and fixing secure coding issues?
So I was responsible for over 700 engineers, right? And
yeah.
I was pictured as the bad cop. Okay, so you need to know that there are some roles in life, like lawyers, like security, like I don't know, but sometimes you take a side. Okay, engineers know that when you enter the room, like, oh shit, now we have more work to do. Okay, and I think if you are a good security manager, yeah, people should know that when you work with them, you don't want to block the roadmap, the new features, things like that. You want to enable everything. I think from hundreds of features and workflows in our augmented reality product back then, we only blocked one that was broken by design in terms of privacy. Okay, just to give you an idea of what is broken, taking the feed of the cameras and uploading everything to our servers. This is something that I didn't allow because I knew one day it will get hacked. Okay, so when we talk about security, sometimes you need to avoid tripping yourself. Okay, so it's also part of that. So you start with a small, back to the question of like, how do you train them? Okay, so you start with very fun activity like a CTF or a few slides with very like basic bugs like SQL injections that we mentioned, and you try to open the minds of your audience to show them, guys, this is so easy, this is so cool, and let's also take some practice. And then what we did as well in our training back then, we told them, let's do code reviews to each other in like APIs receiving payloads, and let's see if we forgot, for example, to verify the input or to do some escaping or whatever techniques you need to do with the input. Okay, so this is how we did it, and it worked.
I think there's a lot of opportunity here for fun, right? Because hacking is fun. It's sort of it's gamified. I think that's why, you know, CTFs are so popular among hackers, pen testers. So we can definitely introduce that into the developer community. We see that, you know, since we launched, I think we have a few thousands that have, you know, played our CTFs. So, and they're developers, and we're getting amazing feedback. So I think, you know, that gamified approach is really something that people are even willing to spend more time than just like watching something that they feel that they're not learning anything from. So they're willing to put more time if it's sort of a challenge or a skill that they can acquire.
Another way to probably you know, phase in with security and not overwhelm, because I think we're talking about how can we avoid overwhelming a team, is to introduce the basics. Okay, that's important. The basics, the OS 10, kind of like the high level and so forth. And then pick a topic every month. Do it periodic, like don't overload, you know, a lot of material at once, because people will be overwhelmed. They won't remember anything. They won't be able to practice it and so forth. If you break it down to smaller pieces, to bite-sized pieces, developers can spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour a month, right, to learn something new. So if you break it down for them, and then you can create, you know, additional levels of the same thing, like if you talk about injection vulnerabilities and you have the second level of injection vulnerability, things that are more tricky and so forth, you can build on that. But it needs to be an ongoing process. It's not just one time that you go through training and now you're a secure developer. It doesn't stop there. It can't stop there.
I think a great message in something you said, and I see that between customers, for example, that are, for example, buying Wizer for compliance reasons, and those that are actually want to do security. So those that want compliance, they look at training as a single activity a year, and they just check the box and that's it. People that take security seriously, it's throughout the year. It's intertwined in their daily work. It's not something that, it's not a task to be completed in the beginning of the year and then because you just can't learn and remember and practice everything you've just, watched, learned. It has to be throughout the year. So looking for programs that really have this ingrained throughout the year continuously. I think that's sort of the way to go. Last question for you. What do you see the trends? If, do you see any new trends around application security that you want to like touch, things that we should look out for?
Maybe I just want
to
say one thing about trend. If you think your copilot will write secure code, you're wrong. Okay, that's actually first point to say, because we haven't touched this point. So still security is needed anyway, even if you have automatic code capabilities.
What do you think is actually more secure? That's actually a question for you guys and for the audience as well. I would love, and that's a great question that I would love to maybe post online as well. What's more secure, code that was generated by a person or code delivered by AI?
In the end of December, a research paper came out of researchers exactly looking for that, and I don't know the numbers by heart, but it was something like 70% more vulnerabilities in developers who use Copilot.
Oh, wow.
And it was a crazy number.
They blindly accept it. They get addicted. Like I know for a fact, it's really tempting to hit tab and just use whatever they give you. And it's tempting because you want to get it done. You want to get it done. And sometimes you just don't look at really closely at what they're writing. So
it works, but it works too well for attackers as well. That's the problem.
Gil, do you have anything else to say about it? No, sorry. Go ahead.
And about the previous questions, and I think the first thing that a customer needs to do is to prioritize the issues, to understand what is the most important things in the organization, and look at the overall. I think that you have a perspective for the overall organization, not only a specific vulnerability, but to understand how this vulnerability might affect you in the big picture. For example, if you have critical vulnerability in a service that it is not exposed to the world, it's not the same as the critical vulnerability on a service that is exposed to the world using an API and it has access to the database, for example. Another concept that we now we have added to our platform is the reachability. We want to understand if you are really using the vulnerable function. For example, a package might contain vulnerability, but you use this package but you don't use the vulnerable function. So the priority and the severity of that vulnerability is much lower than, let's say, the CVSS score is 9.8, but you don't use that vulnerable function, so the score is much lower than that. So you need to understand the overall infrastructure and the access for that vulnerability, and if you really use the vulnerable function and prioritize your findings and then take action based on that.
Yeah, and maybe to add on top of that, of what we are doing at Piano, we build data protection for developers. So we give you APIs to encrypt the data that you want to store if it's sensitive data. And sensitive data can be even today with privacy regulations, even the full name of the customer, just to give an example, or the email address or phone number, this kind of categories. And the APIs should take away the pain of how to deal with encryption, what algorithms of encryption you need to use. Just like you need to be a security expert, you need to be a cryptography expert. So we take away of the pain with rotating keys or doing keys management and distributing keys. All of this, when you scale your software, becomes a real like engineering problem, and we build the infrastructure to take away all of this. So you can just use no-brainer APIs to do it. So part of security is, how do you secure the data of your customers. It's not like how to make sure your code is robust. It's everything. So yeah.
I want to add to that because it's actually a great point, Gil, because like it's so hard for companies after the fact to find where their PII data is. So like you're going to spend millions probably later scanning all your databases, all your files using regex, you know, trying to figure out because it's free form. It's crazy amount of time, resources, additional databases, false positive, all of those things. So if you, again, going back to the basics, if when you develop your app, if you think about privacy at the design, if you think about security at the design, and it can be as simple as, like you said, user stories, using the right technology, you're just going to be saving so much later, and it doesn't really cost almost nothing, to be honest, and it's not going to slow you down. You just need to be aware. That's all. Just be aware of those things at the beginning, and at a very low cost, it will allow you to scale. Everybody's talking about, you know, how do we scale? How do we scale? You know, you don't want to scale the business and find out later that your technology doesn't scale. So it has to be hand in hand. Your go-to-market has to scale, your product has to scale, your privacy has to scale, your security has to scale, and doesn't take a lot. Just you know, this is why we're doing this, right? This is why we're doing this webinar, is to raise some awareness, and for security teams to just take that into consideration, and also to founders to remember that, you know, you should do it now, not when you have Series A, Series B, Series C. You know, like you don't want to slow down later. When you're raising that money, usually it's to hit the gas. It's not to rebuild everything from scratch. So yeah, that's sort of my key takeaway from this. Yeah, anyone final words before we conclude this webinar? And by the way, thank you all very much for, you know, sharing your wisdom with us. Cool. Do you want to say, Itzik? I'll just go like we started, like just final 2-3 sentences.
I think a few very important things were discussed today. And one of the most important thing is, I think, priorities, because overwhelming security is overwhelming by design, because it's never going to get to zero. So you can do so much and will never be zero, right? We talked about that. We want to aspire to go there. We want to go there, try to do whatever we can to reduce the risks and so forth. We'll never get to zero. So there's, by definition, there's infinite amount of things that we can do. How do we prioritize infinite? That's the problem. I think what was said here was, you know, use scanners, use kind of like methodologies from inception. Then you minimize things that you need to do later on that are too late, like bugs that are discovered way later, way after design, that are in production, going to be more costly. So I think the different approaches here that were raised to prioritize and to think about what is the most important thing. How do I prioritize my vulnerabilities, my data, and say, okay, this is something I want to keep more, and how do I track the information? How do I make sure that the information doesn't get there? You know, or sorry, that there's no cracks in the information in there. So I think that's the important part, and that's the takeaway, the most important takeaway from this webinar.
And by the way, when you say, just also tell people how they can contact you if you want, because we have some questions. Some people probably would want to ask more questions. Some of them are very, very technical, so they can, if you know, if you guys want to, for people to reach out to you and you want to respond, so just, yeah, let us know how we can reach you. Gil.
Yeah, for me, I've given many examples and talked a lot. So I will say one thing: if you don't have an incentive to learn security, then you can imagine one day maybe Gen AI will replace you as a developer. If you do learn security, then you have promised job security forever, because this is something that is not going ever to fade out.
Cool. And you're also on LinkedIn, right?
I'm on LinkedIn, Gil Daba. You can find me. I'm always responsive. So yeah.
Cool. Robbie.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Robert van Rooij, or on YouTube, Twitter, anywhere else as Pink Draconian. and that's where I post some hacker videos as well. So if you want to see that site, definitely go there. I think the main takeaway for me here is that your developers don't need to be world-class hackers, but your developers do need to be basic hackers. They do need to have the mindset of a hacker because they are securing the application that hackers are going to attack. And if they have that mindset, then that helps a lot. So it doesn't take a lot of time, but take the little time that is needed to give your developers the mindset of a hacker, because it will make you so much money in the future in breaches that don't happen.
Great. Nor?
I'm available at LinkedIn as well. My key takeaway here is take shift left as you can to prevent new vulnerabilities. Starting from Jira, I really like that concept. Actually, I take it with my team to add security in the ticket itself. It's a great point, and I'll implement this type of methodology. Really liked it.
Great. So guys, thank you very much. This was a great session. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll do more of this. So thank you and take care. Bye-bye.
Everyone,
Thank you.
bye.
Yeah,
Thank
take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.